Please don't be inhibited from asking questions because of the recording. Okay, you'll see a handout, and I put a little humor, but it's actually humor that's directed towards the topic, the material that we're going to be studying tonight. One is a husband who asks his wife what this latest kitchen gadget is, and he's holding a pot. So with that in mind, it's quite remarkable the depth of research that the halachic poskim get into when they talk about different kinds of appliances for the purposes of Shabbat observance. And there are probably new technologies that I'm not aware of that you may be aware of and that we can discuss at some point. When it comes to, and then the other cartoon, of course, is we will be talking about Cholent at some point and some halachic issues that you need to be concerned about, whether you're going to be using beans or not. So anyway, I want to provide us with a short syllabus of terms that every homemaker should be aware of in terms of the laws of Shabbos. And so the terms are, and of course we'll be using many of these terms. The terms are, the first one, of course, is Bishul. Bishul means cooking. And it's a halachic term as well as a descriptive term of what's going on when food is being cooked. The Torah prohibit one of the 39 forms of labor is afiyah, is baking, because baking was one of the things that was done in the temple on a daily basis. They would bake the showbread, and they would also cook the dyes that were used in the temple. And as a result, what we learn is that any activity that was done for the construction of the tabernacle constitutes one of the 39 malachos. And so since cooking dye is one of those things, so both baking and cooking are malachos of Shabbos. Tzli, roasting, and afiyah is baking. Those are all Hebrew terms, but they occupy different categories in halacha. And you'll see why that is momentarily. There's a term called yad soledet bo. Yad soledet bo means that it is hot to the touch. And that is the halachic definition in many instances of something that is heated to a point of it being capable of being cooked. If something is raised to a temperature that is less than yad soledet bo, then it is not capable of being cooked. And as a result, one of the leniencies that we will see is that if you'd like to remove the coolness off of an item, you can avoid some Shabbos problems by placing it on a surface that is less than yad soledes bo. Generally speaking, according to a number of poskim, you are permitted to use your hand as a criterion, but there are other poskim who say that that's assuming that your hand is of the average sensitivity. I know, like, my wife can hold things much hotter than I can. So it's a lot of times it's very subjective. She can hold a really hot pot, and I can't. I just can't do it. It's just like I drop it. So there is an absolute temperature. Some poskim say it's 40 degrees Celsius. Some say it's 45 degrees Celsius. There's different opinions. Bishul achar bishul. So this term, bishul achar bishul, means that something being cooked after it's already been cooked. And we break this down into separate categories. A davar yavesh, again, the next term that's under the words bishul achar bishul, davar yavesh means a food substance that is dry. What do we mean by a food substance that is dry? Like a potato kugel or a lakshan kugel. Something that doesn't have a gravy. And if it's already cooked, it is not subject to recooking. And therefore, heating up a potato kugel or a noodle kugel will not present a problem of bishul on Shabbos. Now, tonight we're discussing the issue of cooking on Shabbos, which is a malacha. Next week, we're going to present a discussion of terms that are called shehiyah and chazara. And those are terms which are not milachot of Shabbat, but they are rabbinical laws that state that under certain circumstances, even when you're not presented with the problem of cooking, there still may be a problem of reheating a substance that's already cooked, because it could lead to other things. That's the reason for the rabbinic ban. We're going to explain it more comprehensively next week, but for our purposes now, if we're specifically talking about cooking, according to halacha, something is not subject to being recooked if it's completely dry. But here the rabbis said, Ein bishul achar bishul. There's no such thing as cooking something once it's been cooked. If it's already cooked, even if it's cooled off and reached room temperature or colder, it's not subject to recooking. So there's no Shabbos violation if I reheat a substance that's already been cooked. But they only said that by dry food items, things that don't have a gravy or a sauce. And the reason is because the rabbis suggested, at least there's one opinion among the authorities that suggests, that when it comes to liquids, yesh bishul achar bishul. There is a problem of recooking. When a substance is a liquid and it has cooled off to room temperature, it is subject to recooking. And therefore, even if I have chicken soup or any other kind of soup, and it's fully cooked, but I want to reheat it on Shabbos day, and I wanted to reheat it to a temperature of yad soledet bo, where it is hot to the touch. So that will definitely present problems of bishul, and perhaps, according to some poskim, a person is committing an isser deoraita, a biblical violation, by reheating a fully cooked liquid item. So this doesn't just apply to soups, it would apply to sauces, and it would apply to a tin of chicken that has a gravy on it, right? So when it comes to reheating chicken, you can't say, it's okay to reheat chicken on Shabbos because chicken is dry. Well, not necessarily, it depends. Does the chicken have a gravy on it or not? The gravy may have gelled, but if it has a gravy on it, unless it's like small little tiny granules of gel, that's not a problem. But if it has if it's like in a pool of gravy or sauce, so then you're not allowed to reheat that on Shabbos, even though the chicken is dry, but you'll be reheating the gravy, and that presents a problem. Okay, so that's the distinction between a dry food substance and a moist food substance, a davar yavesh and a davar lach. The reason why we distinguish in halacha between three states of something being cooked, whether it's roasted, boiled, or mevushal, bishul, or ne'efeh, or baked, is because those occupy different statuses in halacha. A food substance may be completely dry, but if it was dry baked and not dry cooked, then it could be subject, if let's say something was a baked substance, like a piece of bread, and then I put it, and it's fully baked, and then I put it into a pot of liquid, then I am potentially violating Shabbos, because we paskin that yesh bishul achar afia, that it is possible to cook something that's fully baked, or to bake something that's fully cooked, or to cook something that's fully roasted, or to roast something that's fully cooked. Okay. So that's why it's important to know the substance, and we're going to give you some examples later, some practical cases. There's another term that I'd like you to familiarize yourself with, which is the next in the list, and it's called kalei habishul, things that are easily cooked. Now, there are certain things that it takes a long time to cook. There are other things that cook very easily, like tea leaves. You just have to put a very small amount of warm water on them, and they already start to emit a flavor into the water, which is essentially cooking the tea leaves. And that occupies a separate status in halacha, and I'm going to address the whole issue of tea and coffee within our discussion tonight, with some surprises perhaps for you. The next three terms are Kli Rishon, Kli Sheni, and Kli Shlishi. And perhaps I could ask someone to maybe close these doors. Thank you. You've probably, I'm sure most of you are familiar on some level with these terms. A Kli Rishon is a primary vessel, which means that it is a vessel that has hot liquid in it that has been on the fire or that has been removed from the fire. Okay? So it's either on the fire actively or it was on the fire and has been removed from the fire, but the substance in it is still hot. That's a Kli Rishon. A Kli Sheni is the container where the liquid from a Kli Rishon is poured into. You pour from a Kli Rishon to a Kli Sheni, and you pour from a Kli Sheni to a Kli Shlishi. Why are those terms significant? We're going to discuss. The next term that I'd like you to be familiar with is the term iroi, which is the act of pouring itself. And when you pour something from a Kli Rishon into a Kli Sheni, then the liquid, the stream of liquid that comes out of the Kli Rishon has the halachic status of the Kli Rishon itself, and it does not have the status of a Kli Sheni. And finally, the last term is davar gush, and perhaps I hope I've not left out any other terms. If you can think of a term I've left out, please let me know. Davar gush is a solid food item. And why does that make a difference? Well, if you have a very, very hot piece of meat or piece of kugel, and it's placed even on a secondary or tertiary vessel, container, it sometimes can retain its status of a Kli Rishon by virtue of the fact that it's dense and it retains its heat more easily than something like rice or something else like that is not a solid that retains its heat. Okay, so those are the concepts. That's your glossary for tonight. And now I want to talk about some practical cases. Heating up cooked food that is either dry or moist with a gravy. I touched upon that. That was one of the first things we mentioned. Assuming that you have obviated the issues of shehiyah and chazara, which are placing something on an open fire or returning something to an open fire, which is forbidden on Shabbos even when you're not cooking. So we'll assume that you're working with a hot plate, which is not itself meant for cooking, and we'll focus our full discussion on that next week. But let's say you're using a permissible heating substance, but it's hot to the touch. You're allowed to reheat a dry item on Shabbos, but you're not allowed to reheat a fully cooked moist item on Shabbos. And the example that I gave is either a soup or something with a sauce, something with a gravy. I remember one of my poskim said that even when it comes to reheating lasagna, there's different kinds of lasagna. There's watery lasagna and there's dry lasagna. Depends whose recipe you use. So if you're using a watery lasagna, so then it's problematic. You should not be reheating watery lasagna on Shabbos. But if you're dealing with a dry lasagna, there's no liquid in it at all. So then it's okay. Okay? Now, the fact that the cheese may melt, it does not melt into a liquid. It melts into something that is viscous and far more viscous than any liquid, and therefore that does not present a problem. Okay? Okay. The next issue. Placing challah and croutons in your soup. Mrs. Sonnenberg, yes?
One thing. You take something out of the fridge, condensation, the foil pen, the Pyrex, whatever. Not with like a kugel, but let's say with chicken. There's like always all this water, this condensation.
The beads of condensation on the sides of the container.
Under the parchment paper, on top of the parchment paper. I spend all this time transferring it from that. I take something new that's dry, move the chicken over, whatever, before I put on the plata. Do I need to do this? Are the beads of condensation? I mean, it's wet. It's water. It's a liquid. It's not just like...
It's a very good question.
It's not just mist. Like you
It's a very good question. I never thought of it. Never thought of it. I would recommend that you try, if there's a significant amount of condensation, you dry it off with a towel on the outside, but you don't have to make yourself meshuga over it. Okay, as I mentioned, like if you have pieces of chicken that they're like little tiny beads of hardened gel, right? Don't make yourself meshuga. That's fine, right? It's got to be that there's a significant amount of gravy that is disparate from, that is clearly divisible from the solid. And I would say that, again, you should, don't make yourself crazy. If you've taken it out of the fridge and immediately you discover that it's, the easiest thing to do is take it straight out of the fridge and put it on the plata and let whatever is going to happen once it's been put on the plata. Right, so you're not doing an act of cooking, and it's certainly not your objective for those beads to condense and to get hot. So I wouldn't worry about it. I think that if you do notice that there's condensation, try to wipe it down with a towel. Okay, placing challah or croutons in your soup. Now this goes back to what I had alluded to a moment ago, which is that there's a concept of yesh bishul achar afiyah. That even though something is fully baked, if it is placed in a kli rishon, which can cook, anything that's placed in a kli rishon where the liquid is hot, we say that item is susceptible to cooking. If it is poured from a kli rishon into a kli sheni, it is no longer susceptible to cooking in most instances, except if it's mikalei habishul, things that are easily cooked. Now, here's the problem. The poskim say that it's not so easy to determine what food items are mikalei habishul and what are not. What things are easily cooked and what is not. A raw piece of chicken is not kalei habishul. That's quite clear. If you put a raw piece of chicken in a secondary vessel which is hot, has hot water, you're not going to be liable for cooking. But what about if I take a crouton or a piece of challah? That, according to some poskim, maybe, we're not sure, it may be susceptible to being kalei habishul, and therefore there are many poskim who frown upon the practice of placing your crumbs and your bread or croutons into your bowl of soup on Shabbos, okay, for the reason that if you're transferring it directly from the pot on the stove and transferring it directly into the bowl is now a kli sheni, and because yesh bishul achar afiyah, then there is some susceptibility potentially for cooking the croutons. Now, hold on. Now, there's a very simple way to obviate this challenge, according to all the poskim. The Mishnah Berurah talks about this. He says, what if you use a ladle? The ladle becomes your kli sheni because you've scooped it out of the kli rishon. And now your ladle is the kli sheni and you're pouring it into a kli shlishi. In that situation, you can certainly be lenient for these purposes and say that you can for sure put your croutons and your challah in the soup. And therefore, one of the things that we advocate is not only for cleanliness purposes, it's probably neater if you use a good ladle than pouring it directly from the pot into the bowl, is that you should avoid, whenever possible, to pour directly from the pot of the soup that was on the fire into the bowl. You should use a ladle so that the bowl of soup now becomes the kli shlishi. All right? So, as long as you don't leave the ladle in the pot. Once you leave the ladle in the pot, then the ladle becomes heated by the kli rishon, and it no longer is a kli sheni. So it's as long as you're just scooping the scoop out, the ladle's a kli sheni, and your bowl is now a kli shlishi. It's no problem. Also, what's no problem, according to most poskim, is the mini mandals, that you buy from Osam or from whatever. And the reason is because, and believe it or not, those of you who really love munching on them, those are fried, and they're not healthy. Yeah. And because they're fried, and because many poskim say that something that is fried can be considered akin to cooking, therefore, for these purposes, you're not liable, even if the bowl of soup would be considered a kli sheni. So that's why I use the example of croutons or pieces of bread, because the mini mandals, since they're fried, is even less of a problem. Okay.
So is there a distinction between, like, you can't do any cooking in a kli sheni either? Like, kli rishon and sheni, there's no real difference?
No, there is a clear difference between kli rishon and kli sheni. A kli rishon that has hot contents that are yad soletispo, whether it's on the fire or not, can cook a food item. And if you insert a food item, what you're doing is prohibited. And potentially, if it does cook in there, then you're actually, not only have you done a prohibited act, but you've done a malacha, an actual biblical malacha. Do you understand the difference between lichatchila and bidi eved? Something, lichatchila, you may or may not do something, and bidi eved, if you did it, how bad is it? Okay, so lichatchila, everyone, the poskim agree, you may not take an uncooked substance and place it in a kli rishon, because you're subjecting it to Bishul. Okay? If you take an uncooked food substance and place it inside a kli sheni, sometimes it's subject to cooking and sometimes it's not, depending upon the ease of that particular item to be cooked. And therefore, whenever there's a doubt, it's always better to avoid placing an uncooked substance into a kli sheni. A kli shlishi now occupies our third category. A kli shlishi, according to many poskim, for most things, is not subject to cooking at all. And therefore, unless you know for sure that an item is easily cooked, you never have to worry about when hot water or other hot liquids are in a kli shlishi, in a tertiary vessel.
So can you put like fresh parsley on your soup, hot kli shlishi already? Because that cooks very
It's a good point, yeah. So you see that parsley is mikale habishul. It would be, we consider something that's very easily cooked. It's an excellent question. And it really all depends on how you view a kli shlishi. So let me use that as a segue to my discussion of making tea and coffee on Shabbos. I am not a tea drinker, but I'm a big coffee drinker. And I'm a bit of a snob when it comes to coffee. And I'm a little bit ashamed to admit it, because if I wasn't so hedonistic, it wouldn't really matter to me what kind of coffee I drink. So I'm not proud of the fact that I'm a bit of a coffee snob, but I am. And the fact of the matter is that every single morning I brew fresh coffee from coffee grounds. For me to have a cup of instant coffee on Shabbos is reducing my oneg Shabbos, because it means that I am drinking an inferior product on Shabbos, something that is far inferior to what I am used to drinking during the week. And that doesn't sit well with me. It just doesn't, it rubs me the wrong way. So I've spent years, not really, but I spent a long time trying to find out how what are the halachic aspects of how you can have a freshly brewed cup of coffee on Shabbos. And I want to discuss that with you because it has its applications to tea as well. Just curious, tea drinkers, raise your hand. Coffee drinkers, raise your hand. I think the coffee drinkers have the floor. Okay, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to discuss this very, very carefully so that hopefully there won't be any misunderstanding. There is a machlokas in the poskim that if you have hot liquid in a kli shlishi, can it ever cook a very, very susceptible substance, like a substance that is very susceptible to cooking? There are poskim who say that if something is very susceptible to being cooked, then it should never be placed in any vessel, even a kli shlishi, a tertiary vessel, because that's still subject to cooking. Its whole makeup is that it is ground or reduced to a certain feature that even though it's uncooked, it's meant to be cooked easily, and therefore you should not expose it to any hot liquid whatsoever. Rav Moshe Feinstein disagrees. Rav Moshe, in a tshuva that is that has been quoted quite often, states that once liquid is hot, but it is in a kli shlishi, it is not capable of cooking anything, even kalei habishul. And therefore, there are those who are machmir and those who are mekil, those who are stringent and those who are lenient. But recognize that if you wish to be lenient, you're not relying on some left-wing, liberal, modern Orthodox rabbi from somewhere in the Midwest, right? What you're relying upon is Rav Moshe Feinstein. And Rav Moshe had very, very strong places. He was really very, very very highly regarded as the posek of America for the entire 20th century and into the 21st century. And therefore, a person who wishes to rely on Rav Moshe's psak should feel very comfortable doing so. No one's telling you that you have to rely on Rav Moshe's psak. If someone wishes to be machmir, they should be blessed with their chumrah. They should be blessed for taking upon chumras. Chumras, personal stringencies that a person takes upon themselves, are a virtue, provided that it doesn't end up compromising something else, right? In other words, if you take upon yourself this chumrah, which will result in you not having a freshly ground cup of coffee on Shabbos, and you become resentful of Shabbos, and eventually you start disregarding Shabbos and you throw away halachic observance because you can't have your fresh cup of coffee, then that obviously is a chumrah that is destructive. But if you feel that you would like to be machmir on this matter, please do not use what I'm saying as in any way pressure upon you to be lenient. That's not the objective. But this is for people who really would like to have that sense of Einig Shabbos and feel comfortable doing so with a psak that is very, very acceptable. And it is as follows. Coffee grounds are uncooked. They are roasted. But yesh bishul achar tzli. Something is subject to cooking even though it's already been roasted. And therefore, if you were to expose the coffee grounds to hot liquid in a kli rishon or in a kli sheni, then that could potentially be a problem of bishul. But and here's the big question. What if you only exposed the coffee grounds to hot water from a kli shlishi? Then, according to Rav Moshe, what you're doing is completely fine. And the same thing is true with tea leaves. Okay? Now, there are people, when it comes to tea, the tradition in Europe was to make tea essence and to have tea essence that remained warm because you kept it on the blech, so as to obviate the potential problem of recooking liquids. Remember, we said you're not allowed to recook liquids once they've been brought to room temperature. And then they would have a hot cup of water. They would add the essence to the water, and that would be completely no problem. Completely no problem. That's how people used to make a cup of tea. With the advent of the tea bag, Rav Moshe was of the opinion that you are, as long as the kli, as long as the cup is now a kli shlishi, which means you've poured it into a cup from the urn, and then you've taken that cup, which is a kli sheni, and you pour it into another cup. That other cup is now a kli shlishi. Rav Moshe felt that you are allowed to drop the tea bag into the hot water and allow the tea to the tea leaves to mix with the hot water and to give you a fresh cup of tea. There are a couple of issues that Rav Moshe was stringent about in that situation, and he felt that there are a couple of issues. Number one, there's an issue of schita, of squeezing. You cannot squeeze the tea bag, because by squeezing the tea bag, you're potentially doing another malacha, which is squeezing, or there's a type of schita, which is one of the 39 categories of labor on Shabbos. Another issue that he felt was problematic was a separation of the liquid that's coming out of the tea, and therefore he advocated that what you should do is you should leave a little bit of water that allows the tea bag to remain submerged at the bottom of the teacup, so that you're not completely draining your teacup. And under those conditions, Rav Moshe felt that it was certainly justifiable to allow a person to use a tea bag on Shabbos. Now I want to get to coffee. Now I'm not going to take questions until I'm totally finished with this discussion of tea and coffee, and then I'll be happy to take questions. Because I want to get to a very important sort of punchline, which is how do you make a freshly brewed cup of coffee on Shabbos? Okay? I'm going to give you two possible solutions to this. There is the easiest way to do this would be to try to replicate what a coffee maker does without using the electric coffee maker. We have today something called a pour-over cone. I have a few of them in my house. Do you know what I'm talking about, a pour-over cone? Okay, just go to any Canadian Tire or any coffee store, and they'll show you it looks like a cone. It's a cone with a flat bottom on it. You place it over the coffee cup. You take your number 2 cone filter, you place it inside the cone, and you put your grounds in there. A lot of sort of the fancy boutique coffee shops actually will make you your coffee that way. Okay? And you put your fresh grounds in there. Now, what you do then is you take your water out of the urn, and now it's in a kli sheni. You pour that into a kli shlishi, and you pour the hot water in the kli shlishi over the coffee grounds in the cone, and they spill into your mug or whatever you're using to drink your coffee. And according to Rav Moshe, that would be permissible. There's only one question that has to be addressed in this issue, which is what about the problem of separation or straining on Shabbos? And fortunately, there's a sif in Shulchan Aruch that states that if you're pouring clear water through dregs of pressed grapes, and you're doing so in order to obtain the color and flavor of the grapes. That's what people used to do. After they would press grapes into wine, they would keep the dregs and they would pour water over the dregs through a filter so that it would be, let's say, flavored water. You know, it would have the flavor of grape. And the Shulchan Aruch writes that that's permissible to do even on Shabbos. And the reason is because since the water is not changing other than in flavor and a slight color, you're not altering, you're not straining anything out of the water. The water that goes in is the same water that comes out. Nothing is being held back of the water itself. And therefore, it's not a prohibition of straining. And so the poskim point to this as well, and they say, pouring hot water over a pour-over cone, as long as the water is in a kli shlishi, according to Rav Moshe, is perfectly permitted. And that's why I've been known on occasion, when I really feel I need that special caffeine rush in the morning before coming to a long day at shul, I will make myself a cup of coffee that way. I don't do it every Shabbos. I'm just saying that sometimes when I feel I need that extra bolt, and so that's what I'll do. That's solution number 1. Solution number 2 is not as accepted by the poskim, and we don't recommend it. However, I wanted, for comprehensive purposes, to bring it to your attention. There is a minority opinion in the poskim, very reputable poskim, I should add. Not like these left-wing, out of the blue poskim, but significant, reliable poskim, but nevertheless a minority opinion, who are of the opinion that you're allowed to set a coffee maker on a timer on Shabbos, set up the water, set up the coffee grounds, and allow the coffee maker to operate and turn on by itself on Shabbos. There is the reason why the majority of poskim disagree with this is because there's a rabbinical ban on having appliances work for you on Shabbos. Rav Moshe was very opposed to causing appliances to be set on timers to go on and off on Shabbos. The only exception that he made was for lighting, and afterwards he was also lenient on HVAC, on heating and air conditioning. But with the exception of those things, what we would call sort of, vital interests of a Shabbos home, Rav Moshe was opposed to allowing other electrical appliances to be operated on a timer, for the simple reason is that it becomes Ois Shabbos, right? No, I'll set my television on a timer, Ois Shabbos. I'll set the radio on a timer, Ois Shabbos. I'll set this appliance on a timer, Ois Shabbos, right? So it's Shabbos goes, Shabbos leaves. In other words, you lose that sense of the Sabbath because everything is operating on a timer for you. I'll set my dishwasher on a timer. I'll put the dirty plates in, I'll close the door, and then I'll set the dishwasher on a timer so it doesn't turn on until I... So all of these things Rav Moshe was extremely opposed to. And therefore, and that's the consensus of the poskim. Now, as far going back to the issue of the pour-over, which is what I advocate, I should make it very, very clear that other kashrus agencies, even local, are not in favor of using a kli shlishi for coffee and tea. COR is very machmir in this respect, and I respect the chumrah. But I just felt that you should know that there is another opinion, and that is Rav Moshe. Based on that chumrah, COR came out with a psak. You know those little Starbucks packets called Via or Via, whatever they're called? So the reason why this is problematic, because not all instant coffee was created equal. There are coffee crystals that, like Folgers, which are clearly have been cooked, and there's nothing wrong with placing them in a kli sheni. But we advocate, because of certain poskim, that when you use coffee crystals that are clearly from instant coffee or freeze-dried coffee, that you first put the water in the kli sheni and then you add the coffee crystals or the freeze-dried coffee. But what COR does is they say that's true for purely freeze-dried or instant coffee. But what if you have instant coffee that is a combination of pre-cooked coffee plus micro-sliced fresh coffee grounds, which is what gives the Starbucks Via packets their special flavor, is because they're cheating a little bit, and what they're doing is they're mixing in actual coffee grounds, but they grind it up so finely that it actually dissolves in water. So that's the concern, is that if we let you use it, you're going to be cooking those very, very finely cut coffee grounds, and therefore you cannot use it, even if you're machmir on the kli shlishi issue, even in a kli shlishi. And that's why a couple of years ago, COR came out with a policy statement saying that you couldn't use them on Shabbos. I hold that you can use them on Shabbos. Again, if you put them, the hot water in a kli shlishi, and then you add the Via coffee, perfectly fine on Shabbos, because according to Rav Moshe, a kli shlishi does not cook at all. Okay? Okay, now I'm ready to take some questions for tea or coffee drinkers. Marlene.
I like tea, and I also have wonderful tea leaves. So would the tea leaves be similar to preparing like you would the coffee grounds?
You could use a pour-over for your tea leaves, yes. Exactly the same. Great. Okay, Sandy.
Did you say that you can put Folgers for instant coffee in a kli sheni?
Yes, you can put it even in a kli sheni, but you should put the water in first, because according to many poskim, pouring from a kli rishon onto coffee crystals may be problematic. And therefore we advocate that you put the water first in the kli sheni, the secondary vessel, which is the cup that comes straight from the urn, okay? And then add the coffee crystals. Normally when we make instant coffee, you put the coffee crystals in first, and then you let the hot water go on top of it. On Shabbos, you should reverse the order.
Does the same apply for those mint leaves, like the nana leaves?
It would apply to anything. You see, that's the beauty of Rav Moshe's psak, is that once a kli shlishi doesn't cook, it doesn't cook, no matter what. You can take your favorite doll or your favorite teddy bear and put it in a cone and pour hot water, and it won't get cooked. And there's nothing. It won't. You can take a plant, you can take something, you can take anything and put it in there, and it will not get cooked. That's the whole point that Rav Moshe says, is that a kli shlishi simply does not cook items. Yes?
So when you make coffee, instant coffee, and you want to put the coffee, you pour from the kli sheni, and then you put your coffee in.
You pour from the kli rishon
Rishon, sorry.
into the kli
And
sheni.
then put the coffee in.
Yes.
But if you're using the kli shlishi, you can put you can pour the water over the coffee.
Yes.
The order is different because you're using a third.
Yes, that is correct. But also because there's an inherent difference between coffee crystals and freshly ground coffee. Okay. Yes.
Sort of to follow up on that, in a kli shlishi, does the tea bag, if you're using a tea bag, does it have to go in after the water?
Yes, you should put it in after the water.
Okay, and then also a long-time question that I get around to asking. Does the kli shlishi have to be dry before you pour water? Sometimes people sort of reuse what was someone's kli sheni that becomes someone else's kli shlishi.
Okay, so again, it's a great question, but don't make yourself meshuga. If it looks dry, you can deem it to be dry. Could there be some molecules of moisture beads in there that are very small, not visible to the eye? Yes. Do your best. Dry it out if you need to with a tissue or a towel, and then use it.
I'm going to say, if someone just used it as their kli sheni,
If someone else just used it, you shouldn't.
right
Right,
away.
you shouldn't use it right away.
Ideally, it should be dry, a kli shlishi
Right.
before. Okay.
Ideally, yes. Okay, good. Let's go on to a couple of more topics if there are no more questions about the coffee or the tea. Instant oatmeal, I get this question once in a while. Instant oatmeal is clearly kalei habishul, and therefore, according to the machmirim who say that a kli shlishi can also cook kalei bishul, you can never really make instant oatmeal on Shabbos. But if you go like Rav Moshe, you put your hot water in a bowl, which is a kli shlishi. It's got to be a kli shlishi bowl. And you can add the little packet of instant oatmeal into the bowl. And now there are two qualifications, right? The two qualifications are that the poskim say that you have to have two types of shinoi, two types of change, whenever you're making a mixture that is a homogeneous mixture like this that makes the object thicker than it was originally. See, here we have to be a little bit more stringent because whereas before we were talking about tea and coffee, which does not change in its viscosity when you make it from hot water to hot coffee or hot water to hot tea, here because you're changing the viscosity of it, you're making it into something called a belila, which is something that is viscous. So the poskim say that you have to do two changes. Number one, you have to put the water in before the oatmeal, since normally you put the oatmeal in before the water. So you have to put the packet of oatmeal into the water, which is a kli shlishi. And then the second stringency is that you're not allowed to stir it in the normative fashion. Normatively, you would stir using a circular motion with a spoon. And here, you're only allowed to stir what is called shesi va'erev, which is back and forth and side to side. Not, that's called shesi va'erev, which will remind you of our cousins from another religion, right? But that's basically, you're making an X, right? You're going back and forth this way, and then back and forth this way. You may not stir in a circular motion. And then you would be allowed to, let's say, for the kids or whatever it is, to have that instant oatmeal. Okay, next, number 5. Mixing salad or condiments with cholent on your plate. Okay, so Rabbi Spitz was telling me that a lady came over to him who goes to Rabbi Spitz's, the wife of a man who goes to Rabbi Spitz's Wednesday night share, and she says, "You've created shalom bayis problems in my house." He says, because now my husband learned about this concept called davar gush, which is a solid hot food item. Let's say you have a solid piece of meat from the cholent, and you put it on your plate. So normally we say that anything that is poured from a kli rishon to a kli sheni, does not have the ability to cook anymore in most instances. But if you're dealing with a hot, solid, dense, homogeneous piece of food, like a hot piece of potato kugel or a hot piece of meat, so then while it's on that plate, that's a kli sheni, but it nevertheless is deemed to be its own kli rishon. And it has the ability to cook items that have not been cooked. So if I wanted to take my coleslaw, let's say, and put it next to a hot piece of meat or a hot piece of kugel that was heated, that kugel could have a din of a kli rishon and is now cooking the liquid and the salad that is next to it on the plate. This is what some poskim say. Certainly if a person, again, don't make yourself crazy over it, but it is preferred to avoid exposing yourself to that situation. Either wait until it cools off significantly or try to keep them separate on your plate.
But if
Yes?
you take your kugel from your rishon and put it on a serving plate, which is now your sheni, then it goes on your plate.
Doesn't matter.
That
Doesn't matter
change it?
because the heat within the, and probably we could prove this scientifically if we had a thermometer, but the heat that remains inside that piece of kugel retains its heat because it's this dense solid that no matter how many times you transfer it from the kli rishon is going to retain its heat. Okay? So that's the issue. Yeah.
But I have no eyes tries to tell me that science has nothing to do with kashrut because you know that the water in a kli shlishi when you're making your coffee is really just as hot as when it came out of the urn. It does not cool down in the 3 seconds. You do 2 transfers, but it's not halakha cooking, so it's not halakha cooking, even if it would be scientific cooking. So why can water lose its property of heating and cooking in a kli shlishi, but a kugel or a meat can't?
It's a very good question. The rabbis said that the act of pouring from one cup to another automatically cools off a liquid. A davar gush, a solid food item, does not go through that kind of morphological change, right? Of that change of shape, so it's not exposed to air on all sides like a liquid is. That would be my guess.
Maybe that's the lettuce will come in because the third cup of tea is hot.
Third cup of tea is still yad soletis bo, but again, it's been compromised. That's, I guess, what the poskim are of the opinion of. Okay. Yes, go ahead.
So,
Sure.
sorry, I just wanted to know, so what happens if, somebody is, serving cholent, and they're also serving, and they have cold cuts.
Mm-hmm.
So I was at somebody's house who was doing that before I was from.
Nothing wrong with the cold cuts hitting the cholent because the cold cuts are totally cooked.
Oh, because they're totally cooked.
Yeah,
So she couldn't
yeah.
serve that.
Sure.
She was afraid to.
Yeah. I don't think that's an issue. I think that more should, let's say, a fresh vegetable, something like that. Yeah. Or something with a sauce. Okay? Okay, we covered number 6. I mentioned that if you'd like to take the coldness off of a food item, and you know that it's got liquid in it, one of your options is to put it on a surface which is not yad soletis bo. And so, generally speaking, our hot plates are yad soletis bo. That's clear. But what if I can find a surface like the top of my old radiator, or some other surface which is not hot to the touch? And I just want to put something on there to give it a little bit of warmth. That I'm permitted to do on Shabbos, even if there's liquid in the item that I'm heating up, as long as it's not possible for it to get to Yad Soletis Bo. As long as it's not possible. Yeah.
Let's say you make something new, so you don't have experience with it, and you put it on the hot plate. And when you go to uncover it to serve it, liquid has come out of it, and there's a whole liquid or gravy on the bottom of the pan. Are you not permitted to serve that?
That's a great question. I would tell you that you're not permitted to take the gravy. You can extract the dry stuff, and you can serve it dry, but you cannot pour out the gravy. Okay? Yes?
Can you heat up something on top of a cholent pot, on the cover of the cholent pot?
Well, if it's dry, that's for sure okay. There's even a new, I saw advertised on social media, there's a new gadget that some balabusta came up with, which is a foil cover for that is contoured for the lid of a crock pot that has a flat top to it, so it's specially designed, patent pending, specially designed for acting as a warmer for your food when you want to put it on top of your cholent pot. It may be. It may be considered yad soletis. A lot of the crock pots are yad soletis. I would be hesitant to tell you automatically that you can heat up something with a liquid in it. Yeah. Yes.
Can I use a hot plate and put like something dividing it, like from the
Like an aluminum pan or something like that.
And then put something on top.
So that does not obviate the problem of yad soletis, though. That obviates another issue, which I'm going to get to next week, about something called chazara. But the issue of if it's yad soletis, it's yad soletis. You have to just check to see how hot is it. There are times when you can create an insulator between the very hot surface and the surface that you've now created. And if you've sufficiently insulated it so that it's just warm to the touch but not hot to the touch, then it's fine. Okay? Now, stirring or spooning out the soup or cholent that's on the fire. The poskim actually say something very interesting. A food can be fully cooked so that when you stir it, you're not cooking it anymore. If you stir it, it's already fully cooked. But the rabbis were concerned about the following. If we allow you to stir a soup or a stew that's cooking that may not be fully cooked, the act of stirring itself could constitute a contributory cause to its getting cooked faster. And therefore, I will be liable for having cooked on Shabbos just by stirring a soup that's on the fire, that's hot or in the process of cooking. And therefore, the poskim say as follows. If you have a pot of soup that's actively on a hot plate or a hot blech, and you want to serve soup from it, you have to first remove it off the fire in order to serve the soup. Even if your plan is to only serve half the soup in the pot and save the other half for the day meal, you're not allowed to stick your ladle in and start scooping out soup if it's still on the fire, because you're doing an act of, you're agitating the contents. And by agitating the contents, if in theory something was not fully cooked, you might be contributing to the hastening of the cooking of certain constituents within that pot, and therefore you have to remove it off the pot. Next week, when we talk about the whole concept of chazara, we'll talk about what you have to do in order to be permitted to return the pot to the fire. Because let's say, now that I know that I have to remove the pot off the fire in order to serve the soup, is there a permissible way and a prohibited way for me to put it back on the fire on Shabbos? And the answer is yes. We have to know the halachas of when I can return something to a fire and when I cannot. And we'll talk about a blech, we'll talk about a hot plate, all of those discussions will be next time. But for now, I just wanted to make it clear. Shabbos morning, you wake up and you notice that the top part of the cholent is a little bit dry and the bottom part is getting a little bit too brown. And you want to stir it up because you know it's for sure cooked, but you just want to stir it up. You can't stir it up on Shabbos if it's still in the heating unit, because that's a rabbinic prohibition of stirring an item that is on a fire. Okay? What you can do is you can remove it from its shell, hold on to it at least with one hand. You can then stir it with the other hand, put the lid back on, and then return it to the crock pot. Okay? That you would be permitted to do. You would also be permitted, by the way, if you wanted to, let's say the cholent is too dry. Well, what you can do is you can take hot water from the urn, which is already cooked, yad soletis bo, and you can put it in either a kli sheni or even a kli shlishi, but it's still yad soletis bo, still hot, so there's no issue of cooking it, certainly because it's only subject to recooking if it reaches room temperature. And you can take that hot water, as long as the cholent is off of the fire, and you can add it to the cholent to prevent it from drying out further. Yes?
Stir it then?
If it's off the fire. If it's off the fire, yes, you can stir it.
And something with not putting the lid down, or is that made up?
The lid is okay. The lid is okay.
You don't have to hang on to the lid.
You do not have to hang on to the lid. And finally, the last thing I'll discuss is hot water from the tap. I think most of us already know that turning on the hot water tap on Shabbos is a problem of Bishul on Shabbos. And the reason is not because of the water that's coming out of the tap, not because of the water that's coming out of the tap that's hot, but rather because the water that's coming into the boiler after you turn on the tap. When you turn on the tap, you're causing old water to come out and new water to intake into the boiler. And that new cold water that's being intaken into the boiler is getting cooked on Shabbos. And that's the problem. And that's when you're using the old-fashioned boilers. Certainly when you're using the new instant hot dispensers. So that's for sure, that's a clear malacha on Shabbos for two reasons. Number one, you're operating an electric appliance. And number two, you're doing a clear act of instant direct cooking of the water on Shabbos. By the way, I should point out that this is one of the distinctions between Shabbos and Yontif. On Yontif, you're allowed to turn on the hot water tap to wash the dishes, to get hot water for even theoretically a shower, which is not out of the scope of tonight's discussion. But that's okay on Yontif because you're allowed to cook water on Yontif. But with the instant hot dispenser, which a lot of homes have converted to, where there's actually no boiler unit, but rather as soon as you turn on the tap, you're activating a switch which heats the water instantly. So you're operating an electric appliance on Yontif, and that's not permitted. So if you do have a boilerless heating system in your house, that does create a liability on Yontif, which would preclude you from being allowed to use it on Yontif. And that's something to discuss if you find yourself in that predicament. Yes?
If you're in a hotel where the boiler unit is for the whole hotel, not for you yourself.
There are poskim who, yes, it's an excellent point. The question is, what if you're in a hotel? Not even a hotel. What if you live in an apartment building or a condominium building where the hot water is being heated up for multiple people? And so your contribution to that is minimal. I haven't fully researched that. I'm not yet prepared to say it's okay. Not yet prepared to say it's okay, but I do understand the argument to be permissive of that. But I'm not prepared yet because I haven't fully researched it. I'm still trying to figure out what the answer is, and I'll let you know when I figure it out. Yes?
Are you allowed to put a hot plate on the timer, or is that also like any other?
So according to Rav Moshe, you should not put any heating substances on a timer. Just no different from a coffee maker. Yes?
Can you have the timer turn it off so that it doesn't go back on?
Yeah, so Rav Moshe felt that was not a good thing to do. You should not have appliances turning on or off on Shabbos.
Even with the danger of the fire that happens.
Right, so that's the thing, is that I felt, you may remember I gave a drush about this, Alina, years ago, when that horrible, horrible tragedy happened in New York, where a family was using a defective hot plate. And I said that even though Rav Moshe was opposed to this, if you're concerned about the fire hazard, then you can use a timer. Because then it was an issue. At that time, we really were all very fearful of malfunctioning that could cause a fire. You should know that there's a frum guy, an engineer, who came out with a hot plate a few years ago. I forget what the brand name is, but he specifically designed it to stay on. Because the problem with a lot of these hot plates, number one, they're poorly manufactured. Number two, they're not manufactured generally to stay on for 72 hours, which would be on a 3-day yontif, right? They're meant to stay on for a few hours, and so sometimes you can actually just naturally overheat the coils, and that could cause a fire. So this guy is a frum guy, and he's an engineer, and he manufactured a hot plate that was specifically designed with the insulating ingredients that would protect it from a fire hazard. I know I bought one when it first was on Jumpstart or something like, or Kickstart, something like that.
Can you buy that stuff? Do you know what it is?
I'm not sure, but I guess if you do a Google on a Blech electric heating plate for Shabbos, something like that, maybe you'll be able to find it. If you can't find it, send me an email, and I'll see if I can find it in my old emails.
Those round ones that fold away?
No,
It's a
it's a big rectangle. Okay, yes.
What if I have a crock pot and there's a timer that I set before Shabbos, and and it turns itself off automatically after a certain amount of time.
Yeah, so I said, like, Rav Moshe is not so happy with those kinds of things. He's not happy with timers.
Is there somebody who is happy?
Yes. If you're looking for a heter, you can find a heter. Just like I told you, there's heterim for coffee. But I think that because Rav Moshe was opposed to it, I'm sort of reluctant to tell you that it's okay. I'm reluctant to tell you that it's okay because Rav Moshe who was so lenient in so many other areas, felt that timers on appliances should not be used on Shabbos except for lights and HVAC. Okay? All right. Thanks for coming. I hope you got something out of it.
Thank you very much.
We'll see you next time.